Discovery.
3, 2, 1, 0, 0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Welcome to the Podcast Discovery Show, the podcast that's about other podcasts, where every single week we have a book club style discussion about a podcast. And at the end of this episode, we're going to have a brand new podcast to recommend. We'll talk about that one next week. I'm Kirk.
I'm Zach.
And I'm Matt.
And this week we are talking about a show by Fil Corbitt called The Wind, where he had a show that got pretty popular called Van Sounds, where he would kind of just explore around and really make an atmospheric show that you can tell immediately when you start listening to his shows. He loves sound. He loves making essentially he uses the sound of his podcast as kind of like an artistic piece, and it's really cool. But his newest show is called The Wind, and he has set up it essentially looks like two logs in the middle of a forest, and that's where he records this. And he has a bunch of interviews on there. The episode we're talking about is called Frontier Music. That's all about the sounds of Westerns and how that kind of interacts with the mythology of the frontier and the West.
Okay, so before you go too deep, when you recommended this show and also when you described the show, I was a little bit worried this guy, because I remember Van Sounds. I liked Van Sounds, but there was a lot of like, this is the noise. This is the sound of hitchhiking and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh man, is it going to be like super artsy to the point where it's like, you hear that log? There's 38 rings in that log. It's 38 years old. This is like, and you're just going to get too artsy about it. And then it's just going to be like, okay, it's not even talking about anything anymore. He's talking about what the inside of this log sounds like. But no, this show is awesome. Mm-hmm. It was not what I was worried about.
Yeah, no, I was curious what you guys would think, because he definitely thinks differently. He does a lot of different projects. He works on a lot of music. He plays a lot of random instruments. He will do editing for people. He also has put together things called GPS audio walking tours, where you can download. So if you are in Reno or Lake Tahoe, you can download a GPS audio walking tour. You get an app on your phone, and then when you walk around, his voice will talk to you at certain specific points. So it's like having GPS podcast mixture that will kind of like tour you or like take you and like tell you interesting things about where you specifically are at that moment. So in general, I think that he just thinks a little bit differently. And so, yeah, it definitely is like sometimes it's very artistic and he's really digging into stuff. But this one, I honestly recommended because I like Western movies. I fully understand, and we'll talk about more, the problematic nature of their very origin, kind of when they were coming out, problematic. And like and we talked about this a little bit before, the bad guys in every Western movie, pretty much, give or take, there's some that aren't. The bad guys, for the most part, are Native Americans. Like, they're the people who were here first, and they end up being like the bad guys. And so I understand that. But some of these movies, the mythology of it is so good. And like, you had really, really highly respected directors working on them. And you had these larger than life characters like Clint Eastwood and John Wayne that were just kind of, I don't know. It's just such this moment in time that's what got me started on, is because I would just see them on TV. And so I'd watch these Westerns. But yeah, it kind of starts out talking about a lot of these types of premises, like them essentially finding a signature sound for Westerns. And the signature sound was designed by, what was it? A Russian, somebody from the Netherlands, and basically a bunch of non-Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where they start, is like, these things have a sound. And it definitely was one of the main things that I loved about Westerns was those soundtracks, especially the like the spaghetti Westerns. I'm trying to remember what his name is, the director, not Morricone,
Leone.
right? Yes,
Leone.
Sergio Leone. Yeah. And so they're so good. And you get Clint Eastwood, he barely talks in any of the movies. You get that whole kind of like rugged stranger thing. And then you have those Ennio Morricone scores that are just amazing. Like, yeah, exactly. Just iconic. And so
they talk about that too. Like the because I was thinking, like, what is a Western? Like, what does it even sound like? I was trying to think in my head. I haven't watched a lot of them. And when they started playing the music, I was like, oh, yeah, no, I know that. It's like it clicked. It's like, oh, this is like and like we've talked about before, you've mentioned it many times, Zach, is like it's a stereotype now, but it wasn't a stereotype at the time. It's a stereotype because it was so good. And now it's become ubiquitous to the point that's a stereotype of like, or cliche, should I say, not a stereotype. But yeah, it's those sounds and the way that they were trying to translate giant, vast, open spaces with music, I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I found it interesting how they sort of started. They reminded me of like big epic like marches almost. There are a lot of notes in there. Like that kind of stuff, rather than like a big open airy thing that then I think they became when he talked about like There Will Be Blood and all these different ones that really got the essence of like space. These guys were like filling the space with epic sounds. And they honestly, John Williams' score in Indiana Jones is very similar to me. Da 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 da. It's like I could picture that.
I could see that
stagecoach going out, and I would the whip and everything. He's got that. He looks like a cowboy almost.
Yeah, he's just a cowboy professor.
Cowboy professor. Yeah, and it was cool. It was cool to and when that woman came on and was talking about all the various like very technical aspects of the scores, I was like, this is cool. Where she's like ba 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 ba, and then it would play right afterwards.
He found like an exact version of what she was talking about.
So cool.
Yeah. So on this episode, he has 4 guests. Gary Farmer, who's an actor and there was kind of one theme movie that was through this whole thing, because Dead Man was playing. He did multiple scenes from this throughout the whole thing. I think he saw that kind of thematically it worked really well with the kind of the narrative he was painting in the episode.
Isn't it called Dead Man Walking?
I don't know. I mean, we can check that.
I'm going to look it up. You keep going.
But yeah, so he kind of uses that as the theme of this, and Gary Farmer's in that. Rian Almacar Scott is the writer who wrote the short stories in that one section. Jeff Grace, and then Catherine Kalanick. And I believe she was the one who was talking about the really technical detail of how they would try to compose this music. And it really became like a very distinct thing. And even when they started playing the Lone Ranger, or like I always think of like Bonanza or Gunsmoke, this was just really, really a big genre for a very long time in American history. And it always was interesting to me because I feel like you deep down, that it's like mythology, deep down, that like this is clearly like glossed over, even when you're watching it. They just did a great job on the movies, but it's so interesting to learn all the like extra little things that are going on here, because I never would have thought like, oh, all of the music was like intentional and they were trying to do a very specific thing with it. And that's why it sounds the way it does.
Well, that was the other cool thing about the mythology of it, is you learned like immediately, or not you learned, but you realized immediately hearing him call it mythology. You're like, oh yeah, this is all bull. Like none of it is like the reality of the West at all. And it's always condensed to good versus evil.
Yes.
Which is so crazy.
Yeah. This podcast as a whole, this specific episode, probably, maybe not every episode, but this one was much bigger than just the sound of Westerns.
Yes.
It just had to do with the sound, but it brought the West as a whole into kind of examination, which I thought was fascinating because I've never really thought about it in this way, nor have I kind of evaluated what we've been taught, what pop culture is in regards to the West. And I didn't even think about it in this way, where the fact that the West is almost seen as like our origin story, other than like the Revolutionary War. This is like the other thing that makes America America. You know what I mean? And it's not a good thing.
But it's not even like that's the thing that the origin story isn't the actual history. The origin story is the mythology, which is crazy because
it kind of makes sense that we all think we're cowboys, even though what we like view as cowboys never existed. It kind of checks with me. I get that. We all had guns out in the West and we'd kill everybody. Like everybody was being killed and being taken. Their land was taken. Like it was just horrifying to live out there. Yeah. And it is really interesting to kind of see these things explored. And Gary Farmer, who also is kind of in multiple parts of this because he's in Dead Man, a lot of that stuff. And honestly, I want to watch that just for, he said that Neil Young did that score.
Dude, did you not know that?
No.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'm going to have to. That one is definitely the one that was like, okay, gotta watch this one.
It is Dead Man, by the way.
But he was talking about how they were raised. And so there was definitely some interesting points that he brought up, because one of the main things about the Western is like, it's the wild, it's the uninhabited,
untamed, uninhabited.
Yeah. The places that are empty and just ripe for civilization to be brought there. Wrong, just wrong. It's just like inaccurate, not what it was. And then essentially, the good guys were always like, why are these people attacking us? We're just trying to build houses here. Like they didn't live there for generations, like just from here, like natively. And so you get all these kind of weird things happening. But then you hear Gary Farmer talking about this stuff and kind of exploring how he views it. And it ends up being like a really thoughtful and interesting perspective on this whole thing, because probably one of my favorite kind of thoughts that popped up during this was the idea that in all of these movies, the openness beyond is a thing. It's like a very present thing. It's that danger that's going to push your script forward, is just the unknown, what's just outside the line of civilization.
Yeah. And that's what I loved, the idea of the frontier. But it's like the domination of the frontier is what the mythology was. And then when was it in Dead Man? He said that when he reached the final frontier was the Pacific Ocean or whatever.
Yeah,
was that? Yeah, and it's like,
that was the like, I guess the last scene is literally the ocean.
Dominate that, like, which is, it's just so interesting. And I love Gary Farmer. I see him in everything, and I'm like, who is that guy? I never remember his name. So I'm glad that he was on this. Such a distinctive voice.
Yeah, but then they talk about essentially the short stories that they go over some of the similar types of things, at least with the unknown. And then Gary Farmer's talking about how that is a very specific and understood thing to native North Americans, because I think he's from like Canada. I don't know exactly all his genealogy and everything, but just like native North Americans, the unknown was known to be unknown. So they viewed it as a concept that was not only something that you must explore, you must find the answer to it. They kind of revered that as being like the great unknown. This idea that there's always some mystery out there, and that's a good thing. That's something that should be appreciated. And then we start getting into, they bring up so many like cool things. Like, a lot of these spaghetti westerns were just Kurosawa movies redone. Seven Samurai.
I didn't know that.
Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, and what was it? Fistful of Dollars was Yojimbo.
But I honestly prefer, even though I do think The Magnificent Seven is a pretty good movie, Seven Samurai is a masterpiece in like film in general, and probably always will be. And I don't know that I would put Magnificent Seven there. I think it's a good Western, but like,
what about the Chris Pratt one?
I did not see it, honestly. What did did you see it?
No, I saw a trailer and said, well, that looks dumb.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience. Like, and I liked the first one, but I saw that. I was like, okay, wow, they just made this really dumb. So I'm out. But yeah, it kind of got into all these really interesting things about how the sound of the West was kind of all fabricated, but it was so important to like American identity that it was just, I don't know. It's just, I really like this podcast, and I was glad you guys did too.
Yeah. And talking about Gary Farmer, before we get off that topic, I did like the way that like his last segment ended, which was he was talking about how like it's been hundreds of years of just bad things and it kind of like not really ever turning a corner. But I did like, and it almost brought a tear to my eye to hear some sort of optimism in the fact that he's like, all right, you know, we're realizing finally, it feels like, and this is from somebody from an outside, you know, he's saying, I can see that there's a generation coming up that finally is like, okay, maybe we shouldn't treat people poorly because of things that they are completely out of control of, or, you know, things like that. And that was, I don't know, it was heartwarming to think of there being a positive future rather than just the doom and gloom of the past and then just continuing it. That's the thing that's so frustrating. And we've talked about this a lot, Zach, on the show in the past. It's just like, we just got to get better. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing politically incorrect. There's nothing that should be, you know, offensive about saying that we should just be striving to be better in every way, you know? And this is one of them.
And in context of the Western mythos, it's like, that's dope as hell, because why are we clinging to this past that's supposedly violent and awful, and like we killed all the buffalo like for no reason,
just because they wanted to.
And like why are we clinging to that? That's absurd. This idea it's crazy. Manifest destiny is like still a thing, just not with land. Like now it's with politics wealth, or whatever. Wealth and
political
all that
power.
Don't talk about politics.
Yeah, please don't bring it up.
I'm just kidding.
That face is already turning red.
No, I'm fine, guys. I'm fine.
Okay, I do need to talk to you guys about Westerns a little bit here, because this, like this whole time I was listening to this, I was like, I want to watch a Western right now, because they bring up some classics. Rio Bravo, John Wayne is like, that dude was just so crazy. He was just drunk all the time. They said that you had to film that dude like before noon, because if you didn't, he was going to be too drunk to do scenes. Like he was just a giant drunk guy just doing movies. But Rio Bravo, it has Dean Martin and Ricky Nelson are his like little guys that are hanging out, and he's like deputies. You know, there's just like the deputies that are just there, but they both
hang out guys.
Yeah, they're both just like singers and really pretty great singers. And so there's just like musical numbers in there that are awesome. But then I think Dean Martin's like wasted in the movie the whole time. It's just, it's pretty good. But it really made me think about, and I don't think they mentioned it, but how some of these have changed, because they did mention a little bit about like There Will Be Blood, because that's, I guess you could call that's probably a more accurate, like Western, you know, more accurate to like that area and that time period. And then I think of kind of capturing that Western idea, but in a different format. And I think of like movies like No Country for Old Men, which if you kind of apply what's happening in that movie and you put it back 200 years, it's a Western. But in that movie, they are famous at this point for they used essentially zero score, like nothing. Like that whole movie is just like,
forget that. Yeah,
it's just like the sound of people. And so that it like there's been these changes to how these Westerns are done now, because it feels pretty terrible to like write a movie that's literally like, okay, and then all the natives, they're the bad guys, so they're just going to be chasing around all these guys and they're bad, so we'll just write that feels good. I don't think anybody would really want to do that too much now. So there is change.
I feel like it's like to look back historically and to see things like the Oregon Trail and shit that were like, you know, arduous journeys of like a year or more. And your family would just slowly die on the way out there.
Yeah.
Like that crap was wild. Like that stuff is so dark. All of the West, this idea that like you're going out to make money, you're going out there to conquer this thing that is unconquerable, that eventually just swallows you whole, is like so scary. Like the vastness. You know which one I always think of? That The Witch, the Dave Eggers film.
Yeah.
Like the untamed wilderness just surrounding you.
Yeah, no, that movie is very uncomfortable to watch because of that. Because they're forever away from anything. They're in the woods.
Yeah. And like the fact that they were like, oh, there might be a witch in these forests. It's like, even if that wasn't true in that movie, but during
There's
the time,
no way to know.
You'd be like, well, I hate my life now. I hate my life. At every second, I'm worried I'm going to get killed by a witch. Like, because you can't know. And if you do, you could still die, but not by a witch.
No, you could die from like a mosquito or just whatever. Somebody got a cold and died. You know, it's
so dark. And like things like The Revenant, I think really capture that as well. Like they talked about.
Yeah, no, The Revenant was a brutal movie.
So good. I love that director.
But yeah, no, that honestly, that's one of the people that got me into finding cinematographers I liked, because that guy is so good. And so like you kind of get to, you can follow his career and just watch amazingly shot movies.
Beautiful. Who is it? What's his name? Do you remember? I'm gonna
look it up right now. No, I might as well. I need to include it now.
But it's so crazy because it's like it's not that the idea of the frontier changed. It's just like the veneer of it got lifted. You know, it's no longer like, here we go, we're gonna conquer the West. It's like,
and sing songs by a campfire,
which is like insane. But I imagine
honestly, in the same kind of vein, I do think that it takes a little bit of heat off of the cinema classic Three Amigos, because they went at it so stupid, so like clearly stupid and on the nose, that they have avoided this fate.
That's funny. Yeah, but I love the concept that these dark movies are coming out, because it's like, yeah, that was dark. It was dark as hell. Here we go to conquer the West. Here we go. Gotta fucking conquer the West.
I'm going to throw this name in here now. The cinematographer for The Revenant is Emmanuel Lubezki.
Yes.
And he has done great stuff. Children of Men, Gravity, Birdman. Like, just like you can just go watch stuff he does. They look amazing. He's very, very incredible at what he does. So yeah, I think. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just gonna say we gotta get together and watch one of these movies.
100%. That, like, I seriously, the whole time I was like, I want to watch a movie now.
Now, that was a good recommendation, and I did enjoy it. And I did like how he ended, and he did end with like the thing that I was worried the whole podcast was going to be about, which is like, it almost sounded like a campfire, but it was literally like the snow hitting the ground, right? That's what he said, at least.
Yeah.
Yep.
It was like he's in the woods and it was the snow hitting the sagebrush or something. I don't know. But it was very artsy.
I did like
the way
how he couched those after like long segments of speaking. It would be like scene, and then he'd describe the scene of the movie, and then you'd hear the movie, and he'd be like, and now Depp is speaking with Farmer, and then it's like he just played it, which is really cool.
He's also very good at formatting and basically storyboarding this show. Like, it was so good. Even at the end, he was like, he did like where he was at, and then he's like, scene, like it was just perfect. It went perfect. It felt like complete. It was like a perfect bow on the end of this beautiful gift that was
100%. 100% agree.
So that brings us to this week's recommendation. And me and Zach were watching the Lightning game over the weekend, and between periods, we were watching some YouTube. And one of our favorite things to watch is Good Mythical Morning, because it's so funny. And Rhett and Link are great. They have this amazing buddy chemistry, and they're so good. And they also have their podcast we've talked about before, Ear Biscuits, where it's just them talking about life experiences and things like that. But they apparently just came out with a scripted podcast, which is so good. And it's something, of course, it's the kind of show that I like a lot. But it's called Ronstadt. And also, that's basically the name of the company that Josh works at, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, I think it's almost exactly the same.
Yeah, it's almost exactly the same.
About recruiters.
But it's definitely not about that. It's about a guy played by Rhett, who he ends up working as like a 911 operator, but for like the weird calls, because he has like this weird sense for basically like supernatural / paranormal things. And it's so good. And of course they've got like this giant crew, so it's very well produced and it's really fun. And it just started. Like it's a brand new show. There's only 2 episodes so far, so I am going to recommend both episodes because they're like 30 minutes each. Episode 1, which is Shadows of the Night, and episode 2, Listen Like Thieves. And that is Ronstadt. And if you need to know how to spell that, it is going to be in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for listening. And remember,
there's always more to discover.
This was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.